Hello my friends, and welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. With the recent recoil changes across the board in Tarkov, a lot of builds have finally climbed out of the dumpster and back into the meta. And I'm very happy to report that pretty much all of the 5.56 rifles are not just usable now, but pretty damn good in their own right. I've already covered the M4 and the 416 in my first video with the new recoil. So for this one, I wanted to take a look at some of the off-brand 5.56 options, namely the SCAR L, the G36, the MDR 5.56, and the AUG. Now the MDR and the SCAR were both already quite good before the recoil update, and now they're both just even better. The fun part though comes along with the G36 and the AUG, which both went from being borderline useless to being pretty great overnight after the recoil update. So for this video, I just wanted to go over these four rifles, talk a little bit about how they feel after the update, and share the builds that I've been running on them. You might notice that the AK-101 and 102 are suspiciously absent from this video. I just felt like packing 6 builds into one video was a little bit ambitious, and I'll probably take a look at them next. First up for this video though, I had to go with the G36, because I really do think this rifle got revolutionized overnight after the recoil update. When it was first added, the G36 was kind of written off immediately because of the insanely jumpy recoil, and it was just awkward to shoot. After the update though, the vertical and horizontal jumpiness is pretty much gone, and the G36 now shoots really smooth, and you can actually take advantage of the fire rate in full auto. The new smoothness, combined with a pretty cheap overall price to build a G36 once you've leveled up your traders, makes me think that this setup is going to join the MDR and the SCAR as one of the top mid-range budget picks for 5.56. As a huge fanboy of the G36, I'm so excited to finally have this thing be a good rifle in Tarkov. I still think it's a bit awkward to use big scopes on it because of how high you have to mount it, but this thing is great set up with a red dot sight for close range fights. To start off a G36 build, I recommend starting off with the G36 KV2 as the base of the build, which can be purchased from Peacekeeper level 4 for about 530 USD. If you don't have this one unlocked though, the other option is the G36C sold by Peacekeeper level 2. The reason I recommend these two as the starting point is because the full-length regular G36 needs to swap a couple parts to add foregrips and sights, but these two setups are good to go right from Peacekeeper. The first part that you want to switch out is of course the muzzle device, and right here at the start of the video I'm going to quickly cover all of the top suppressor options for 5.56 rifles. Keep all of these in mind because they all fit onto any of these builds, and to save time, I'm not going to repeat them all for each build. First up, I would say the best overall choice is the Griffin Armament M4SD suppressor mounted on the G-Lock muzzle device. This one gets you the best overall combination of low recoil and high ergonomics, but it's also usually the most expensive one. The second best option is the Saker suppressor mounted on the ASR 5.56 flash hider. This one has about the same recoil stats, but a bit more of an ergonomics penalty. The third best overall option I would say is the new Thor suppressor, mounted on the PSR 5.56 muzzle device. This suppressor has a pretty big ergonomics penalty, but good recoil stats, and it's sometimes a bit cheaper than the Saker or the Griffin. Next up, there's the SDN6 suppressor mounted on the 51T 5.56 muzzle device, which is similar to the Thor, a big ergonomics penalty, but usually a cheaper price. After this, the next option would be the Thunderbeast Ultra 5 suppressor on the 223 CB muzzle brake, which has slightly lower recoil stats, but decent ergonomics and a cheaper price on the market. For the final recommendation here, for a full budget 5.56 build, you can just add the KAC QD 5.56 compensator and the NT4 suppressor, which will get you pretty okay recoil stats for about half the price of any of those other suppressors. Like I said, remember these options because I won't be repeating all of them for each build in this video. After adding a suppressor, the next step is to get some rails on the G36 handguard, and then I go for the Magpul RVG foregrip and something like an X400 flashlight as the tactical device. Next, I add a Delta Point sight onto the G36 sight rail. Personally, I love the Delta Point on the G36, but really any red dot or hollow sight will work here. If you bought the G36 KV2 rifle, it will already have this upgraded stock on it, but if you bought the G36C, you'll also want to add this G36 KV stock as well for some extra recoil stats. After all this, the last thing I usually do to the G36 is add the NATO magwell, which allows you to use normal M4 mags, including 60 rounders, instead of the G36 specific mag. With this build, you'll get somewhere around 49 or 50 recoil, but only about 30 ergonomics. I really feel like the G36 is in a great spot after the recoil update, and it's seriously useful as a close range focused 5.56 build that doesn't cost nearly as much as a fully built M4. Next up, let's take a look at the Scar L. This thing was already very good before the recoil update, and after the update, it is really smooth to fire in full auto or tap fire in semi-auto at longer range. The price to buy one of these things on the market has been climbing since it's so good now, but I still think it's very worth it. The Scar is very smooth to fire, it works well at close and long range, it can be built in several different lengths, and it looks awesome. So really, what more can you ask for? For this build, I will be using the full length barrel, but I did try it out with both the 14 and the 11-inch barrel, and honestly, it felt like the recoil was pretty nice regardless of what length of barrel you pick on this thing. First up, you need to add a suppressor. For this one, I'm using the M4 SD suppressor for the best overall stats, but any of the other options I mentioned earlier work well too. Next, I add the Scar MREX rail system onto the handguard, which adds some extra stats onto the build. The shortest barrel though doesn't work with this rail, so if you build a really short Scar, you can skip this step. Next, you can add some M-lock rails onto this handguard and then slap on a Magpul RVG foregrip and a flashlight or a laser. After this, I switch out the pistol grip for the F1 skeleton grip, and then you just need to add a sight onto the top rail. The Scar works great with almost any sight you want to pick, but for this setup, I just have an EOTech hollow sight. For one final improvement, you can add some MBUS iron sights for 2 more ergonomics. With this build, you'll end up with around 51 recoil and about 37 or so ergonomics, but both of these will change depending on what suppressor you use. The slow 650 fire rate of the Scar makes this thing really easy to keep on target in full auto, and it's really snappy on single fire after the recoil update. I definitely think the Scar L is going to be a part of the meta for a long time, so keep an eye on the market for a good price and enjoy running this thing. Next up, let's check out the 5.56 MDR, another build that was already quite good before the recoil update and is now even better, giving you very smooth recoil and the best ergonomic stats out of all of these builds. The high base ergonomics is what really separates the MDR from these other rifles. It doesn't have quite as low of recoil, but it has almost double the ergonomics, which means it's quicker to aim and it's much better for hard scoping for a long period of time when you're aiming at someone from a distance. Overall, I think the MDR and the Scar feel quite similar, and it's up to you to decide whether you want better ergonomics or better recoil between these two rifles. To start off, swap out the muzzle device for one of the 5.56 suppressors, and once again, on this build, I'm just using the M4 SD suppressor to showcase the best stats. Next, you need to add 2 M-lock rails to the handguard, and then you can slap on a foregrip and a tactical device. After that, you just need to add a sight, and then I would also add some backup iron sights for the extra ergonomics. With this build, you'll end up with around 57 recoil and 60 or more ergonomics. The MDR still feels quite smooth to go full auto, and the extra ergonomics makes it one of the better options for adding a magnified scope to fight at longer range. Overall, I still kind of prefer the Scar for the fashion appeal, but the MDR is very comparable. Finally, we come to the AUG, which up until a few days ago was kind of in the same camp as the G36, with very awkward recoil when fired in full auto. After the recoil update, this thing does feel a lot better, but I'll be honest, it still has the worst recoil out of these 4 rifles because of the way it jumps side to side. That being said, it's pretty cheap compared to the other options, and the recoil isn't so bad that it's not worth using. It does also fire slightly faster than the Scar and the MDR, so it will take people down a little bit faster when all your shots hit. Another big bonus of the AUG is that, like the MDR, you really only need to add like 3 parts to go from stock to a full build, so it's really simple to set up, and that cuts the cost even further. If you have an AUG A3, you can start making this build right away, but if you have an AUG A1, there's also a quick way to swap out the receiver and get yourself a sight mount. All you need to do is go to Peacekeeper level 3, buy the AUG A3 receiver and the AUG sight mount, and then swap these out for the fixed sight that comes with the AUG A1, and then you can start building. The first thing you want to do is add the Ratworks muzzle adapter onto the barrel, which then allows you to add any of the 5.56 suppressors I mentioned at the beginning of this video. After this, you just need to add a sight, and then a flashlight or a laser onto the single rail on the receiver, and that is literally it. You can't mod anything else on the AUG. With this build, you'll end up with about 50 recoil and 40 to 45 ergonomics, depending on what suppressor and what version of the AUG you're using. Overall, I think this build is now good enough that it's worth running for people who just like the AUG and want to use it. But if you want peak performance, I would say stick to the other 3 rifles. Well, that pretty much covers it for the builds that I wanted to talk about today. I'm feeling super positive about the recoil changes so far, since it feels like every weapon that I decide to try out now is actually worth it. These 5.56 rifles, combined with pretty affordable M856A1 ammo, add a lot of tools to our arsenal that are pretty simple to build, very effective, and not crazy expensive. Plus, they give you the style points of running tactical 5.56 guns, which is all that really matters to me most of the time. I hope you found this video helpful, and let me know what you think down in the comments. Did the recoil update fix your favorite build or give you some inspiration to start experimenting with the weapon modding system a bit more? I've got links to my Twitch stream and Discord server down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.